Throughout the year of 2020, we have all been through more troubles than most decades have given. No doubt our very ways of life have been under attack from the beginning. As a movement, we have been halted in our growth by the various crises that have arisen, but we are by no means surrendering. We are faced in an ever-growing battle for the future of our country and countrymen. This year, our enemies have revealed themselves openly to the public, and while their numbers are many, our side's numbers are ever-growing. We find ourselves vindicated in that all we predicted has come to fruition, and find ourselves on the side of the people's interests time and time again. During the early months, we were voicing our full and total opposition to escalations with Iran. We recognize that we hold no valid reason to intervene in the region, and will continue to advocate for the total withdrawal of troops and bases from the region. We bring no benefit to our people by constantly terrorizing the peoples there and only serve to put our troops, our flesh and blood, in danger in order to appease the will of big business and the elite ruling class, of whom are completely illegitimate and have no place in this land. Then came news of a virus spreading across China. Our government knew full well of its existence back in December of 2019, yet no party wanted to do anything until it was already embedded in our country. Then they followed the guidance from the global elites and ordered a lockdown, which is still ongoing 9 months later, with no financial support to the individual people or to the small businesses. Even now, when we can realize the overblown risk of the virus, we still treat it like it is the second coming of the bubonic plague. They claim we're denying science when we bring up its mortality rate and survival rates, because we the people are wrong for not mindlessly following the voices of a few. They ridicule and silence us. For what? Because we want answers to our legitimate concerns? They just claim that it's all debunked, and will call out any slight inaccuracy in our phrasing rather than address our actual concerns. Back before we knew the actual risk that this virus held, and when we saw how China was reacting to it, we wanted action. Back when it could be controlled and handled properly in our country, we called for a 3-week shutdown of the country. No flights, no business, no social affairs. Now, this sounds extreme, but let us emphasize the 3-week portion of our policy. It was not 9 months, and we were calling for this back in January and February, when the virus was still outside our borders for the most part and able to be choked out. We would have all the citizens outside of the country brought back and sent home for the lockdown. Same would go for all foreigners visiting the country, as they would be sent home. Once it was all finished, there would be no international flights to or from the country. Once the lockdown started, everyone would be required to remain on their property at all times and would not have been permitted to leave their properties until the lockdown had concluded. People would be able to leave their homes, but have to remain within their own property lines. The military and guard would have been sent out nationwide to deliver food and supplies to each household, as well as monitoring each town and city's local situations, ensuring no violations were committed. During this time, all supplies would be covered at the government's expense, as well as any ongoing housing, utilities, loans, and other essential costs. Due to the lockdown requiring all people to remain on their properties, this would require businesses to be closed during the lockdown as well. The drawbacks would be obvious, and as such, we would have issued compensation and coverage for any businesses, including building costs, maintenance, materials, insurance, and any other costs that would have resulted in a net loss during those 3 weeks. Naturally, this would be highly expensive, and we can see the concerns that this would bring up. The first concern is, of course, the costs. A government faces massive dangers and risks when it owes so much money, and debt is already a concern. And the estimated total cost of the lockdown would be an estimated $2.3 to $3 trillion, which seems like a lot, and it certainly is, but this is much less than the actual cost of the current virus spending, which currently totals $3.5 trillion, and is expected to equal nearly $5.3 to $5.7 trillion by the end of the whole affair. Keep in mind that the government has failed to give any meaningful relief to the people and small businesses, with most of the money going to Wall Street, megacorporations, and banks. Our plan would have been shorter in terms of time spent, cheaper in terms of cost, and greater in helping people and businesses. Of course, there is the concern with giving the government such overreaching authority, and I cannot give much more words of encouragement. It is exactly what it seems like. We would have used the full authority and control in order to ensure the betterment and security of the people. In many ways, it is as the government claims it is doing currently, except, of course, Our plan would have only required nationwide restrictions for 3 weeks rather than the current restrictions that have been ongoing for 9 months and show no signs of ending soon. Furthermore, we believe that the government should use any power at its disposal to ensure the will and interests of the people. Our plan would have only held restrictions for the minimum amount of time to ensure that our nation would have remained COVID-free. And during that time, we would have done the necessary means to ensure that no one faced undue misery or suffering. From the end of the lockdown, the only limits would have been that no one could fly to or from another nation that had suspected or confirmed COVID cases. None of this should seem impressive because it really isn't. A crisis appeared, and we would have handled it the best way to ensure as little problems as humanly possible. Once the crisis abated, which under our leadership would have only been a few weeks, we would return to relative normalcy, and maintained a strong way to avoid any infiltration by the virus from the outside. This is not even a utopian way of thinking. It is simply the result of careful planning and execution. The final concern is in the economy itself. How would our plan have impacted the economy? It's tricky to determine, but we can safely say that it would have resulted in a better outcome than the which we face currently. The economy would face a harsh drop during the 3-week lockdown, but this happened already, and continued to happen as the lockdown was drawn out. Once our lockdown would conclude, we could begin to regrow. The only concern is our lack of imports or exports, which would be slowly dwindling as more and more countries face infections. However, we would have been given a bit of a grace period. Our economy would be rocky at first, as more and more imports and exports ceased to be possible, but we would institute a nationwide plan to rebuild our industry and truly put our workers and working class ahead in our country, which would by 1 or 2 years' time result in our economy being on the rise again, and even solve our unemployment and underemployment crisis. It would by no means be easy, but with grit and sweat and the ability to come together as a nation and people, we would be able to overcome anything this world throws at us. Our current government failed because it became too involved with the interests of big finance and big tech and money as a whole. We promise, here and now, to never abandon the people. No matter what the global interests try to do to rein us in, it is now that we must either have autarky or we will never be free. In a sane world, this would have been enough. We would have just had to deal with this virus crisis, and we would have spent the rest of the year in relative peace. But that is utopian thinking. We all remember the sheer madness that erupted in April due to the race protests and riots. This is perhaps where we faltered the most. Originally, we were in support of the protests under the condition that they weren't violent. This was due to our lack of support for the current police system. And while we are not supporting the current police system, we have since renounced our support for the protests following investigation into the beliefs and goals of the protests. Simply put, they have led to needless violence and only desire to see further chaos in our cities and to further spread racial division and hatred. Our party will enact full police reform, but our interests are in many ways in opposition to the protesters. Our movement has clear and defined racial positions. In our America, we will ensure the future and rights of the white people in this country. But that is not to be misconstrued, whether inadvertently or malignantly, as anti-black, anti-Hispanic, or anti-any group. I feel the evidence is plainly shown by the racial makeup of our leadership. No, our policies are pro-white, but we are not anti-anyone. We stand strongly against anyone, of any race or creed, who tries to make it seem like whiteness is a bad thing. It are those people who should be fearful of us because they openly threaten us and mistreat us. You would be rightfully upset if a white person or community were to go to Ethiopia and demand they get rid of their blackness in order to appease your mindset, because it is a flagrant attack on their culture and people, just as it would be so in that scenario. So too are we angered by the attack on our Western and Northern European descended white culture. If one wishes to live and practice their own culture in their own homes, we will let them do so. But it will not be tolerated to see a foreign culture put above our own and forced upon our people. If people wish to see their own different culture be the primary one, then they should live in their own lands, and by all means, we should send them technicians and educators if it's a request, so that they may be able to create and experience prosperity. But if they want to live here, they must accept that we have a culture and set of beliefs that must be respected, and that our laws will be made in accordance as such. On to the topic of law and order, we will work to reform our police force. Our biggest aspect of reform is instituting military-level training and instilling military-level discipline. We have let our police standards slacken in the name of diversity, quotas, and the overall need for more force members. Under our government, we will work to restore dignity, honor, and reliability in the police force. During the recent events, we've seen the shameful actions committed by those, quote, only following orders. And while we are not hostile to any occupation or group, we are strongly condemning the murders of the unarmed protesters, including the 14-year Air Force veteran Ashley Babbitt. Regardless of the lack of legality that their actions held, the fact that she was unarmed meant that the police had no valid reason to shoot her, and we will push for justice to be served on any officers who abuse power to such a degree. However, this past year would not have been complete without one last kick. As we are all aware of the disaster that was this election cycle, and while our party is highly skeptical of democracy and well aware of its inherent corruption, we do still want our current system to give the people a voice. However, that voice is always being stifled and stomped on by the ruling elites. In theory, a democracy or republic is supposed to elect its leaders in a fair and free way. Regardless of your political views, we must come to realize that a fair and free election was not done. The elites had an outcome they wanted, and did not care whether you agreed or disagreed. The Green Party, which despite being on a total opposite of our political aisle, calling for eco-socialism and progressive Marxism, we will openly declare that they were mistreated during this cycle. The Democratic Party knew full well that they risked losing votes by picking Mr. Biden as their candidate. This was shown by the Green Party's boost in popularity following the last time the Democrats chose an establishment in the form of Mrs. Clinton, over one backed by their voter base, that being Mr. Sanders. This resulted in them campaigning for the Green Party to be taken off the ballots in the competitive swing states of Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and several other less competitive states. How could the, quote, Democratic Party support such an initiative? Well, it is because they believed that our side was trying to use the Green Party as a spoiler for them. This idea of a spoiler myth is what has been used to prop up our failed two-party system as far back as 1912 in the race between Presidents Wilson, Roosevelt, and Taft, and gives our elites a scapegoat to throw the blame towards when they fail in their only job. This alone should be considered fraudulent and manipulative, by forcing people to choose between candidates they wouldn't otherwise consider. But as always, there is more to evaluate. This election was at best poorly conducted and non-transparent in its methods. This alone would give the people a right to be angry, but contrary to what your elite-funded media would have you believe, there is actual evidence that the election was rigged by the elites. There is an entire website that documents it all, with over 1,500 records from independent sources and research that document illegal votes, polling place irregularities, discarded or destroyed ballots, machine irregularities, and general malpractice, to which, as it stands, has resulted in 2 million ballots affected by anomalies and 923 witnesses to support it all. But our courts and media would rather you just believe that it wasn't real, and at the same time that if it was all for the greater good of dismantling the evils of fascism in our government. Truly, our system is illegitimate. Truly, our system is built to force us into modern slavery. Truly, we are not free, and truly, America is dead. But that is why we are here. We are here to make a new system, one that is legitimate, one that is here to free the people of debt and wage slavery, to free the political prisoners, and to rebuild a new America, one by the people, for the people, and of the people. Our victory is inevitable. Our people are growing stronger. Our movement is gaining speed, and our elites' days are numbered. We will purge the evils of this government, the corruption and nepotism, and restore order, honor, and faith to the country and to our people. Our elites have tried to gun us down like common hunters' prizes, but we will stand strong and charge back with the fury of a bull moose, because the mandate of the people is the most powerful mandate of them all.